Sometimes if you stick around for long enough, you can see, hear a large political balloon deflating. I don't refer to Chuka Umunna, but his project, the project that he and so many other of the well-heeled have been punting for what seems like years now, is probably only months. I speak, of course, of the soft shoe shufflers of the Waitrose Brigade, the so-called People's Vote Brigade, the Second Referendum Brigade, to give them their proper nomenclature. This week, the idea of a second Brexit referendum died, and it died live on television with Chuka wrapped up in his Rupert the Bear outfit, unable even to speak. Such was his disappointment. And this evening, Sky News has a poll which shows 58% of the British people against a second vote on whether or not Britain leaves the European Union. Sing hallelujah, throw your hats in the air. This pernicious diversion is now dead. And as you've just heard on the news, so is the idea of delaying Article 50, which I remind you again would require the Prime Minister, the government, to table legislation to bring that about, not to mention the agreement of the European Union. So Britain is now very firmly on the course, either for the European Union to respond to the British Prime Minister's requests for changes in the withdrawal agreement, which was so comprehensively defeated in the British House of Commons just a week or so ago, or we leave on WTO terms on the 29th of March, which by my reckoning is not very much more than 60 days away. Now, as you well know, that's something of which I thoroughly approve. I'd rather we didn't leave without a deal, because nobody wants any bumps on the road that don't need to be there. Nobody needs any dislocation that can be avoided. But I'm ready to face whatever bumps are on the road if the European Union does not finally, and at the 11th hour, back down on one or two of the concessions that are required to see Mrs. May's massive parliamentary defeat actually reversed. You might think I'm talking through my hat, but I'm here to predict to you that something like Theresa May's deal is what will now pass through the House of Commons. We'll see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. I want your point of view on it in any case. 0344 499 1000. If you disagree with me, your call, your tweet, your text, your email will be prioritised. And I can tell you the email address now. It's talkradio.co.uk. The text number is this. Text the word talk followed by your message to 87222. But beware, that will cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges. It'll cost you nothing at all to tweet me at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Now, as you may have seen on social media, I have been officially recognised as His Holiness Pope George. It's as easy as that. You stand in the street in London or Caracas and you announce yourself to be something that you're not, and some fools fall in behind you. I say fools, though two of the countries are significant ones. The United States and Canada has recognized the self-proclaimed presidency of some guy in the street in Caracas as president of Venezuela. Some other countries have joined in. Albania, the mighty Albania, and Kosovo has swung behind President Trump's demand. And somebody called Jeremy Hunt has half recognized this Trumpian nonsense. It is incredible that on the day that the news is filled with the arrest of Roger Stone, for intriguing, allegedly, with WikiLeaks, and thereby Russia. An entire industry based around Robert Mueller has moved into gear over the last 2 years and has rendered governance in the United States almost null and void over the idea that a foreign country bought some Facebook advertisements to influence the results of the US presidential election. In the same country, the United States, the president and the vice president, and by the way, if you thought Trump was bad, wait till you see more and hear more of Mike Pence, feels that he has the authority to pronounce from Washington who is now the president of another country in another part of the American continent, which so happens, and these things may not be unrelated, to have the world's largest oil reserves on their territory and be the biggest seller of oil to the United States of America, bar none. Now, this kind of nonsense would have been laughed out of court in the past, but I have had to listen to, and this morning with my good friend Mike Graham on the Independent Republic of Mike Graham here on Talk Radio, actually defend why I'm against the idea that the leader of one country can appoint the leader of another just by fiat. In fact, on Twitter, if you don't mind. And just in case you thought that the big social media giants were not in lockstep with the Imperium, on the very day that Pence pronounced, Twitter took the president of Venezuela's blue tick away and gave it to the guy in the street in Caracas. I'm not even going to dignify it by telling you his name, although all the experts, all these specialists in Syria, Ukraine, Russia, are all scrambling for taxis to the studios and having to bone up quickly on who this guy in the street actually is. Now, the very idea could become catching. Putin, for example, could announce that he now recognizes the leader of the Yellow Vests in France as the legitimate president of the country. I don't know if Russia has a Facebook, but if they do, they could take Macron's blue tick away and give it to the guy in the yellow vest in the street of Paris. And in a crowded field, the award for the biggest act of hypocrisy in living memory must go to President Macron. I still recognize him as the president of France, myself, who said that he saluted the heroic protesters against the government of Venezuela, whilst tomorrow proposing another round of tear gas, rubber bullets, truncheons, and even live ammunition against the brave protesters against his own regime in Paris. You haven't heard much, have you, about the yellow vests? Well, you are tonight going to hear plenty. Because as we now move into what is now almost 3.5 months of yellow vest protests every weekend right across France, which has brought the country to a standstill every weekend. I'm amazed Dan Wootton is headed tomorrow for Paris. Poor Dan didn't seem to know that you won't get near the Eiffel Tower tomorrow, at least not without a gas mask on your visage. Now, the crowded field I mentioned doesn't just include Kosovo, mighty Albania, Canada, and the United States. It also includes these champions of democracy in the EU. Donald Tusk, no less, in his own pronunciamento, has declared this guy in the street in Caracas as the president of Venezuela. And I can't pronounce his name, this Guy Verhofstadt, is it? He's done the same. These are the people telling us what to do in the negotiations with the European Union. These are the leaders of a European Union that liberals and jokers in this country keep telling us is an organization not only that we need to remain in, but an organization without which we'd be painting our faces blue and living in the forests. We require Donald Tusk, you see, to keep us civilized. You really couldn't make it up. We'll be talking to Adam Gary, director at Eurasia Future think tank, and my fellow history boy, about Venezuela and the background to this week's extraordinary events. We'll be talking to Alberto Testa, associate professor in criminology, who studies the far right, about populism, the far right, France, Italy, and Germany. We'll be talking not just to one sage called Adam Gary, but an actual Adam sage, who is our colleague, the Times Paris correspondent, on the eve of yet more protests around France. And we'll be talking to Michael Graham, the other Michael Graham, the American Michael Graham, about the shutdown, which is perhaps coming to an end. Donald Trump is making a statement on it as I speak. It's all coming up tonight on the mother of all talk shows. But this show depends on feedback. It depends on you telling me what you think. If you disagree with me, I cannot stress often enough, everything that you have to say in writing or on the phone will be prioritized. If you're a woman caller, if you're a first-time caller, don't put it off any longer. Call me 0344 499 1000. Well, Donald Trump is making a statement on the White House lawn right at this minute. It's probably the Rose Garden, actually. And he has indeed announced that he's reached a deal to end the shutdown. The US government will reopen on the 15th of February. Far too soon, if you ask me. But you'll hear all the details, of course, on our news bulletin on the hour. You can, of course, tweet me, as Dan El Rojo has. Anyone who supports the anti-democratic coup in Venezuela is not on the left, and you cannot be on the left if you support any institution which backs the coup. The EU supports the coup. A good point, Dan, one which I made myself. Andrew says, isn't it a fact that the reason why so many MPs don't want to leave the EU is because if they did so, they'd have to work a jolly sight harder? And Dan says, I wonder if Blair's boy, People's Vote, NATO chump, Paul Mason, and Blue Peter reporter, it's a bit harsh, Blue Peter reporter Owen Jones are as enthusiastic about the coup in Venezuela as their beloved imperialist, anti-democratic, neoliberal EU. You see, a better class of listener on this show. You wouldn't get that many big words in a tweet from anyone anywhere else. Ray says the US has been trying to create a neoliberal economy in Venezuela for decades. Chavez resisted against this and took on the corporate oil giants and the IMF to stop that from happening. It's not about democracy, it's about control of the oil fields. And Mal says, I find it very disturbing how the Irish government are starting to play Brexit with a fast and loose attitude by suggesting that there probably will have to be Irish army and Irish police having to implement a border which will be of their own making. Considering that a new Republican movement has announced itself, I think the EU and Ireland are playing a very dangerous game of threat and blackmail. This is no way to try and get a united Ireland in my book. And the Gammoner says, anyone against a people's vote is against democracy. Last time the vote was based on lies. People like Chuka Umunna and Tony Blair are brave enough to want an honest debate and final vote. And the Gammoner goes on, the same people who blocked a second referendum misidentified the Venezuelan president. Shows we must have a people's vote. And Russell says, I heard the Ramoning muck spreaders on the Today programme, again hailing the presence of its grim reaper, be liar, brimming as ever with self-importance. And he's convinced that unless he's appointed ruler of the world, we're all doomed. NB, the BBC fronted Roy Hattersley as another EU disciple. Goodness me, is he still coming out? Well, I said earlier that we had a real expert in our midst, a real sage. He's Adam Gary, director at Eurasia Future Think Tank. He presents a show with me called The History Boys on Patreon. Many of you increasingly are coming to know his work. For such a young man, he is an incredible font of wisdom. So I was glad that he accepted my invitation to come into the studio this evening. I know he could have talked about any of the subjects we're talking about this evening, but I wanted to get your expert opinion, Adam, on the situation in Venezuela. Just tell us what lies beneath, will you?
Well, what lies beneath is what lies before. This isn't anything particularly novel in the sense that the United States has been using its military, using its intelligence agencies, and using its agents of influence on the ground and in the militaries of Latin American states for well over a century. In fact, the United Fruit Company, which today is the Chiquita Corporation, sounds a bit less militaristic. This company used to be more powerful than the governments of Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador, and others combined. And whenever there was a leftist political movement, a prime minister or president acting beyond his means, so to speak, in Central America, the military of the United States would be called in. After 1945...
Isn't that where we got the phrase banana republic?
It certainly is.
From the United Fruit Company's rule.
Because the worth of a banana to the United Fruit Company was more than the sovereignty of these nations. After 1945 and the creation of the CIA subsequent to that, we see things kick into an even higher gear. You see US-installed puppet military dictators coming to power after coups in places like Brazil in 1964, Bolivia in 1964, Guatemala 10 years before in 1954, Colombia in 1953. Then there was the 9/11 coup of 1973 when the democratically elected Salvador Allende in Chile was overthrown in favor of the CIA's man in Chile, Mr. Generalissimo Augusto Pinochet. That same year...
And the murder of President Allende.
Of course. And that same year, there was a murder of democracy in Uruguay. Then throughout the 80s, the US was meddling in El Salvador, Nicaragua, with the Iran-Contra scandal dovetailing off of that. There was Ronald Reagan's invasion of Grenada in the early 80s. And this is just some of the kind of meddling, the kind of very dangerous meddling that the US has done in Central and South America. The difference, though, between all of those events and what's happening on the ground today in Caracas is that while the methods are the same, the way they're being implemented is different. That which would have been spoken between a safe CIA phone line in Washington and some generalissimo or aspiring generalissimo in Caracas is now being done in public. It's that much more brazen that we saw a series of events, which was the Vice President of the United States tweeting that he recognizes this guy in the street, Guaido, as the president. Then Trump retweeted that tweet. Then Guaido himself tweeted photos of himself swearing himself in as president without, mind you, switching his Twitter biography, which still referred to his old job title as the chief of a disputed legislature. And then to top things off, you had Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, tweeting that the Venezuelan military should overthrow the UN-recognized president, Nicolas Maduro, in order to pave the way for the guy in the street to become the guy in the palace. In terms of the optics and in terms of the way these methods are being used, it shows a level of shamelessness that even in the 20th century was frankly unknown.
Now, I'm not surprised that Trump is shameless. Shameless is his middle name, after all. But I am surprised that some people with a bit more respectability, maybe a little bit more respectability, are swinging behind it. Donald Tusk, for example, who is a spokesperson for the European Union of democracies. If you're not a democracy, you can't join the European Union, blatantly endorsing the very negation of democracy in Venezuela.
Well, what's going on in Venezuela and around Venezuela is the Charter of the United Nations being not just thrown onto the scrap heap, but being thrown onto a towering inferno. The idea that because you don't like the way a country is run, or because that government doesn't want to do business with you on your terms, that means you can just recognize a self-anointed, self-declared and self-sworn-in leader, and then for this to just be accepted. Now, of course, getting back to the brazenness, I'm not so surprised that Trump and company did this. I'm not even surprised that the European Union has gone along with this, because not since 2003, with the war in Iraq, did we see any resistance from mainland Europe to the brazen violations of sovereignty being agitated for by Washington. But what I am surprised with is that there's so little outrage and so little shock, because frankly, nothing could be more shocking than powerful nations like the US and powerful blocs of nations like the EU saying, oh, the guy says he's president. Okay, shrug our shoulders, he's the president. This is unheard of, even by the abysmally low standards of a country, the US, that's been having coup after coup occur in South America and Central America for over 100 years. Even by these standards, it's a very new low.
It is. The brazenness lends itself to humor. It's not even, it's kind of black humor. Someone said today, it's like the President of France or the Prime Minister of Britain recognizing Nancy Pelosi as the President of the United States, just declaring that President Trump is illegitimate. And of course, you would have a case to make on that. He did lose by 3 million votes. The actual presidential vote, his tenure in office is extremely controversial, to say the least. But no one in their right mind would dream of anointing Nancy Pelosi or Hillary Clinton. Although in this case, the guy in the street in Caracas didn't even contest the presidential election. It's not even as if he's saying he really won it. He didn't stand for election.
Well, the precedent that's being set is incredibly dangerous, and the US government at this moment is setting many dangerous precedents. You saw the arrest of the CFO of Huawei, Meng, in Canada. The idea that a businesswoman is arrested for being a businesswoman in a second country because a third country doesn't like that her company may or may not have deals with the fourth country, Iran in this case. And now you have the absurd situation where they're actually moving not beyond but below the weapons of mass destruction hoax from 2003. Now they don't even need to set up a narrative. Now they don't even need to have Colin Powell holding up the test tubes at the United Nations, or Nikki Haley showing the Polaroids of various so-called atrocities that may or may not have ever happened. You don't need to show pictures of the Russian war in South Ossetia from 2008 and say that it's Ukraine in 2014. It's much simpler than that, and it's much more entertaining. It's much more like a made-for-TV revolution, and it's all being broadcast on Twitter. All you need to do is give a young guy a jacket and a copy of the Constitution of his choice. He swears himself in, and that's it. There doesn't need to be any allegations of wrongdoing, just that he swore himself in with panache, and we like him better than the man who actually won an election according to his Constitution. And beyond this, Jimmy Carter, one of the few, increasingly few, living U.S. presidents, has long been monitoring elections in Venezuela and has long said that they're entirely transparent and entirely democratic. Even that doesn't matter, because all you need to do is have self-belief. This really is the American dream. You can be whatever you want to be, which is why...
Isn't there a song? Isn't there a Frankie Goes to Hollywood song?
That Holly Johnson from Frankie Goes to Hollywood.
Can we dig that out? The Americanos, it's called.
I think it's the new international anthem. I mean, I'm going to declare myself Secretary General of the UN later tonight. I need to have a stiff drink and maybe a bite to eat first, but I'll declare myself that in a few moments.
Actually, this represents the end of the United Nations, doesn't it?
It really does, for all intents and purposes, because it really is spitting in the face of the the UN Charter, which, whatever one thinks of the UN, it's an incredibly noble document, the preamble in particular. And this is just essentially saying, if you can't go through it, go around it. Now, the US has done this many times before, in many cases, but the brazenness,
yes.
it's like
They've
a
usually
Twitter...
wrapped it up in tinsel, but this time they're just driving a coach and horses through it.
We've gone from a banana republic to a Twitter republic, and how appropriate that Donald Trump is delivering it. But mind you, all of the people in Europe, in the American so-called opposition, in holier-than-thou Justin Trudeau's Canada, that make fun of Trump for being too reliant on Twitter, for hashtagging major policy announcements, they're all falling in line behind this, like good Twitter followers who are the tin soldiers of yesterday are the Twitter followers of tomorrow.
Now, the backdrop to it, I listened to my good friend Eamon Holmes' drive time last night. Eamon was reporting that people are eating their pets in Venezuela. That's how hungry they are. A story which is on a par with the babies in the incubators in Kuwait back in 1990. And he then interviewed someone from the Integrity Initiative, though that's not how he was billed, but a central figure from the Integrity Initiative, to tell us that Venezuela represents the abysmal failure of socialism. It's not quite like that in Venezuela on two counts. Tell us.
Well, first of all, and this is the elephant in the room, even if it was all of those things, invading a country and overthrowing its government, first of all, is illegal, and second of all, is morally wrong, ethically wrong, and despicable. The second issue is that there's several things going on. First of all, like the United States and its trigger-happy Federal Reserve, at least before Jerome Powell, but I'm sure that he'll cock it up sooner or later, you have a monetary policy that wasn't very sound, but many countries have that. You also had what they call a Dutch disease, where you have one export asset that is really the one thing upon which the economy is contingent. Other countries have that problem too, on the left, right, centre, and everywhere
Saudi
in
Arabia,
between.
for example.
Very good example indeed, which is why they're trying to diversify their economy. But Saudi is able to diversify it easier because they're not under sanctions. And while the US tends to consult Riyadh when they want the oil price manipulated in one direction or the other, everything the US did in terms of manipulating the oil price through its geopolitical influence was designed to isolate Venezuela further. And because Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves of any nation on the planet, this is quite obviously a big deal. So, of course, there were mistakes made in Venezuela, but there was nothing exotic about them, nothing particularly ideological about them. And in any case, going to war with the country isn't going to improve things. Trade will improve things. If you ended the sanctions tomorrow, you could improve things. And I'll tell you something else. Just before 2003, Iraq wanted to ditch the dollar and indeed did so and started to trade its oil in the euro. Just prior to 2011, Libya wanted to trade on a very sound gold-backed pan-African dinar. Now, in 2018, Maduro announced that a cryptocurrency backed by the asset called oil, sound because it's universally recognized as a tradable asset. The US did everything they could to get rid of this El Petro cryptocurrency from the broader circulation. They made it illegal for Americans to trade in it. They said that we will sanction non-Americans who trade in it. And so Venezuela, which quite creatively built themselves a lifeline to get out of their crisis, they were stopped from doing this. So America, frankly, likes the free markets a lot less than socialist Venezuela, because if the Americans genuinely liked free markets, they would have allowed Venezuela to freely sell El Petro and help itself out of its crisis.
Now, you call it socialist Venezuela, but in fact, the proportion of the Venezuelan economy in the private sector is not less than it was under Margaret Thatcher in Britain. Income tax and other tax is less than it is in Britain. And the only thing the Chavistas have nationalised is the oil industry. I appreciate that's a big thing. But every other part of the economy is in private hands. Is the real gripe that the oil wealth, especially in the Chavez period when the oil price was high, was distributed amongst the poorest Venezuelans to the disadvantage of the richest Venezuelans. In my visits to Venezuela, I can say without a fear of contradiction, the poorer the Venezuelan you met, the blacker the Venezuelan you met, the more minority, ethnic, Native American the Venezuelan you met, the more they were in love with Chavez. And the richer the Venezuelan you met, the more gold teeth in the head of the Venezuelan you met, the more they hated Hugo Chavez, which was helpful for me because it meant that I didn't have to work hard to work out which side I was on. But that's the truth of it, isn't it?
This is one of the classic political phenomena throughout Latin America. In Asia, most of the classical differences between left and right have generally all fallen by the wayside, and that there are other more nuanced ways that we can differentiate parties and political movements. Even in Europe and the United States, things like Trump, things like Brexit, things like what's going on in the streets of France, the recent Italian election, it's blurred the lines between left and right.
Yes, that's true.
But in Latin America, as you say, the lines between left and right are so obvious. They're visual, they're sensual, they're economic, they're quite in your face. And the description that you gave of people looking as though they fell out of a Mercedes-Benz in Madrid being for one faction, and those who are of African or mestizo or mulatto or especially indigenous background, to use the old Spanish classification system, they would tend to go with the progressive parties. But then again, it isn't the people that are deciding. It's a guy who made the decision for the people.
It's a guy in the street in Washington.
What a guy.
What a guy. Let's take a break for some capitalist messages. You're listening to the mother of all talk shows, 0344 499 1000. Now, last week, a lot of people didn't get through because they didn't call early enough. Please don't make that mistake again. 0344 499 1000. You ring us, we'll take your details and get back to you, so it needn't cost you more than a penny or two. I'm off to Neath in South Wales after the show. If you're around anywhere near that area, you can still get seats at the Gwyn Hall. Me and Mr. Topple are going to be talking Venezuela, talking Brexit, talking Welsh nationalism, Labour, Corbyn, the way in which South Wales has been comprehensively deindustrialised throughout the period that we've been in the European Union. And then the next night, that's Sunday night, I'm at the Old Rep Theatre in Birmingham with Red Ken, former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, at the Old Rep Theatre in Birmingham. Again, there's still some seats left at that. I'm in the company of someone I personally regard is just about the cleverest man in England. Certainly the cleverest man I ever meet. And he's only not even 30 years old.
No, I'm a bit older than that, but only a bit.
Only a very bit. Now, he's a remarkable man, Adam Gary. He's the director of Eurasia Future think tank, and I predict a big future for him. Should have his own show. Never mind on talk radio, should have his own show on mainstream television. And he's going to help me through the next 15 minutes or so as we discuss with callers and other communicants what's happening in Venezuela. Let's go first to Joshua in London. Joshua, welcome.
Hi, George. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, George, I think that even though Trump is paying sort of, if you like, lip service and, of course, economic sanctions, as he's been quite famous for lately, I don't think he's going to follow through with, like, say, a CIA-style coup, because I just think it's so cliched. And even someone as small-minded and as simple as Trump is going to think that that's just, it's been overdone and it's quite hackneyed, you know. But
well, let me ask Adam about that, Joshua. It's a very good point. This may be famous bluster on the part of Donald Trump. And, of course, other countries are now answering. Russia backs the legitimate president. China backs the legitimate president. India backs the legitimate president. Turkey backs the legitimate president. Mexico backs them. Bolivia backs them. Cuba, of course, backs them. It wouldn't be a pushover, would it, Adam, if there was any kind of armed intervention by the US?
Well, Josh is right in identifying Trump as being the king of bluster and also the king of cliche. There's one issue which makes it an uphill battle for Maduro, the legitimate UN-recognized president, and we don't get to choose that, the UN does, but it's geography. The most powerful global allies and partners of Venezuela are in another hemisphere, to a country. China, another hemisphere. Russia, in another hemisphere. Turkey, the first country to come out in defense of Maduro, in another hemisphere. And of course, Iran, in another hemisphere, on multiple levels, metaphorically, as well. The United States under Trump has realized something, that while the US still can logistically cause mayhem on Russia's borders, Ukraine, that's literally what Ukraine means, on China and Russia's borders in Korea, in terms of fomenting classic Saddam-style regime change in places like the Middle East, which is to a degree Russia's backyard, geographically and historically, there are many roadblocks, including the fact that Israel is becoming close to Russia and economically to China. Where in Latin America, Trump being the good old-fashioned guy that he is, he realizes that because of Latin America's remoteness from these other epicenters of the Eurasian world, it's still comparatively easy for America to overthrow a government using not necessarily the military, but even a few well-placed assets, briefcases full of money.
Maybe in small countries, Adam, but Venezuela is a very big country, geographically, with a very big population, and the visceral response on the streets of Venezuela has been, how dare the gringos try to tell us what to do?
Indeed, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the Americans won't do it. It just means that while Pinochet took a few days to crown himself presidente in Venezuela, it could be more of an El Salvadorian or Nicaraguan style conflict.
Joshua, what do you think?
Well, I think that, to be honest with you, through proxy wars, I don't think he'd, through active, sort of, if you like, militaristic proxy, I think he would. I think, again, as I said before, I know I'm kind of sounding a little hackneyed myself, but I just think it's so predictable and so, if you like, it's just so easily anticipated. I just think that Trump doesn't want to sort of. He wants to present himself because Trump's, he's into himself. It's all about him. He doesn't want to present himself as your average run-of-the-mill president, And also another thing is because the sanctions are so crippling. I mean, they might even be worse than what they were in Iraq. I don't know for sure. You could probably answer that better than me. But I think he would just let the economic situation implode on itself rather than through further sanctions, of course. But to have active military intervention, I think is just it would just be wasted motion, and because of Venezuela's ties, as indicated by his name was Alex, was it? Sorry, is it? Hello.
I've lost you, but thanks, Joshua. It was an excellent call. Adam, the point that Joshua is making is, of course, on a par with what happened in Korea, with Trump threatening Little Rocket Man with an annihilation, and the next minute he's hugging him in a Chinese restaurant in I forget now where. The bluster usually is a prelude to the deal with Trump, isn't it?
Well, not when you de-recognize the person that you would have otherwise made the deal with. And that's the big difference. There have been reports for just over a year now that secretly Trump wants a meeting with Rouhani, the president of Iran. With Korea, we saw the bluster transform into brotherhood before the eyes of the stage. But Trump didn't say that some guy in central Pyongyang who may have somehow miraculously got an education from the University of Chicago is now the supreme leader of the Korean Workers' Party. So there is a difference in that respect.
Let's hear from Darren in Leeds. Go ahead, Darren.
Hi there, Your Holiness.
Thank you. Thank you, my son.
I'm the self-declared king in the north.
Okay.
And I just want to say, I think you've brought a great guest on.
Isn't he wonderful? Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the way, he can speak about every part of the world, every part of history. We do this program together, the History Boys, and he leaves me open-mouthed, I must say. Go ahead.
I just want to talk about, big issue with Venezuela. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that people like Trump and Macron, who both have, a lot of things to on the mind in their own countries.
Yeah, exactly.
Are crowing for somebody who Venezuelans didn't even know this.
No. He's never even been a candidate for president. Never mind be elected as the president. But Macron takes the biscuit, don't you think, Darren? He's hailing the protesters in Caracas whilst gunning them down in Paris.
I think we should all be looking to Paris this weekend because, the Yellow Vests, they're still protesting and they've still got quite large crowds.
Oh, very large. There'll be hundreds of thousands all over France tomorrow. And what is that, the 12th week, the 13th week, 14th? I've lost count now. But it has become a truly formidable national movement. And no matter what Macron tries to do, it never seems to dampen it down. Darren, thanks for your call, my friend. Adam, the point that Darren is making is, of course, goes to the hypocrisy issue. There's Trump, his government shut down, the feds at the door of his family and of his closest friends, his lawyer in jail, and so on, whilst he's dictating what happens elsewhere in the world. Macron, as I say, taking the hypocrisy biscuit. What do you make of the British government's response?
Well, there's a bit of Gilbert and Sullivan come Monty Python about this whole thing. Trump said that he was going to skip the Davos Economic Forum to start his government back up. Instead, he created a government shutdown in Venezuela. Theresa May can't even come on the recognition of her own party as a legitimate leader, and yet her government is recognizing a guy with a majority of one, himself, as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. But in this malarkey, it really is Macron who is the king of all hypocrites, because the French have actually passed laws to make so-called unlicensed protests more restrictive. They're giving the police more power to crack down. Just if the shoe was on the other foot, you would hear Venezuelan media report about the Yellow Vest this way. The French regime has applied draconian laws against freedom-fighting unarmed demonstrators, some as young as 15 years old. The international community has expressed its concern, and then America would dispatch an envoy. Just imagine, think of it verbally if the shoe was on the other foot. It's extraordinary.
So few people do that. It is remarkable, because the way in which governments like Trump's behave has become the kind of new norm, or at least it's the benchmark against which other things are measured. It's been a fantastic hour, Adam Gary. I'm really, really grateful to you for setting the scene for the rest of the show. 0344 499 1000. You should follow Adam on Twitter, on social media. Adam Gariel, Director at Eurasia Future Think Tank. Adam Gary, thanks for joining us. Now, Dan El Rojo says the Chavezistas' error was to keep the bourgeoisie in power. They left the Trojan horse of the EU and US imperialism on their lawn. Well, you're onto something there, Dan. The very reason why this situation exists in Venezuela is because it is not a socialist country and not a dictatorship. If it were, you wouldn't be in this situation. And I've thought that about Venezuela for a very long time. I tried to put it mildly earlier, that income tax in Venezuela, in fact, the total tax burden in Venezuela on the wealthy and the middle class is much less than it is in Theresa May's Britain. And the level of nationalisation is much less than it was in Margaret Thatcher's Britain. The people who were in power before Chavez, economic power, before Chavez, are still in power and therefore are able to bring the country to its knees in pursuit of its political objective. So you're right, Dan, about that. I add two things, a bit more controversial. They keep talking about the Venezuelan Revolution, but if it was really a revolution, there wouldn't be rampant criminality, and this was true also in Brazil, by the way, and contributed to the victory of the far right in Brazil. Because if you're poor in Brazil or in Venezuela, Criminality is something that comes through your window. It forces open the door of your car. It robs you at gunpoint on your own street. This is not some ephemeral, abstract question. Criminality is the curse of the poorest people. Now, if it really was a socialist dictatorship, there wouldn't be any criminality. There's no criminality in Cuba. Whilst you cannot walk across the airport car park in Miami without getting mugged, you can walk around at 3 o'clock in the morning in Cuba and not be mugged. There is virtually no crime in Cuba, precisely because it is the very things that Venezuela is accused of being. And the second thing, even more controversially, I don't even like saying it, Dan, there is rampant corruption in Venezuela. There's no corruption in Cuba. In China, corrupt officials get executed and the bullet charged to their remaining family. In Venezuela, corruption is everywhere. So if you've got corruption and crime on an epidemic scale, and I've been there and seen and felt it, then you are many things, but a socialist dictatorship you certainly are not. Here's Dave in Conway. Go ahead, Dave.
Hello, mate.
Hi.
Okay. Yeah, just a quick one on Brexit.
Yeah.
I believe, right, the establishment, they're realising now that Brexit is inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're trying to do, they're trying everything to get no deal off the table.
Yeah.
Because obviously they want the weakest form of Brexit.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I think Theresa May's deal will now go through. If the EU have any sense, and they have more to lose from a no-deal Brexit than we do, remember, they sell a lot more to us than we sell to them. A lot more. So if they had any sense, they'd make some concessions, and then Theresa May will get her deal through Parliament, because all the Tories will vote for it, and so will the DUP.
Well, I'm hoping not. George, I'm hoping that no deal will prevail.
Mm-hmm. Well, me too, but it's my job to predict to you what I think is going to happen, not what I'd like to happen.
Okay, mate, that was just my quick point.
It's a good one. Are you anywhere near South Wales, Dave, or is Conway's in the north, isn't it?
Yeah, North Wales.
Yeah.
Llandudno, Colwyn Bay.
Yeah, very nice. Lovely part of the world. Well, as I said, I'm in Neath in South Wales tomorrow, and I'm hoping that all my listeners in that area will be there. Dave, thanks very much indeed for that call. Let me go through the messages, which are many. The Red Resistance says, I've officially recognised Ariana Grande as the new Mrs. Red Resistance. I'm looking forward to her and her personal assistants moving into my splendid 3-bedroom ex-council property with its converted outside privy in Lancashire. That is the tweet of the night so far, Red Resistance. We are living in an age where you can self-define, after all. You can define yourself to be a woman, a brain surgeon, a colonel, or the president of Venezuela. Here's Daniel in Addleston. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, good evening, George. How are you?
Good. Thanks a lot for calling.
Yeah, no, I wanted to get your opinion on this Brexit thing, because I mentioned to you before about European Union military unification.
Yes.
And this
and now
labelling between...
we were told we were conspiracy theorists, Daniel.
But no, can I just say, though, George, because again, from what I'm learning, but again, there's a distinction between what a European army is and what the Union is, because the unification comes first. And it's this what happened with France and Germany.
Well, they renewed their marriage vows last week, earlier this week actually. The 1963 Franco-German Treaty was renewed, and they promised ever closer collaboration, including military collaboration, and both spoke of the need for a European Union army, which will, of course, contain German soldiers. So soon, if there is a hard border between Ireland and the 6 counties, we'll have German soldiers patrolling our border. What could possibly go wrong? Sorry?
Who are these masked people in France with the armband, the police? Mm-hmm. You've got these police people, and they're all masked up, and they've got an orange armband to distinguish themselves from the protesters,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't know who they are.
Oh, I think you can. The CRS in France are well capable of beating their own citizens' brains out. They don't need any help.
But the thing is, no, sorry, what I wanted to say is these so-called protesters and the real villains, the yellow vest people, they ain't all masked up. Were they proper hooligans and that, you'd think they'd all be masked up, but they're not. And I saw something today with Vanessa Beeley. You rate Vanessa Beeley, didn't you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, she was speaking about the yellow vest, what she was saying, and I believe I can quote her in saying that she felt safer being in Syria than when she did being now in France.
Yeah, I was amazed. Our man Dan Wooten is off there and imagines he's going to be visiting the Eiffel Tower tomorrow. But I can promise him he won't be. Daniel, thanks. I need to press on. Here is Tony X, the protest board, the magnificent Tony X. I can't shift the mental image of Macron standing in his golden tower, resplendent in designer yellow vest, fists in the air, shouting, "Vive la Revolution Venezuelienne." Absolutely brilliant. You've got that image in my mind now. Thank you, Tony. Hope to see you tomorrow night in Neath. An admirer from my old hometown says it's a good job for Lochee that it's far away from Venezuela. Gallo Glass. And Alec Moss says, will the UK's lack of oil protect us from US imperialism when we elect a democratic socialist government? Or might we be in trouble with our special friend? Well, of course, you will be. If Britain elects a Labour government and that Labour government tries to do some of the redistribution of wealth that the Chavez and Maduro governments have done in Venezuela, why wouldn't you have the Americans announcing that they have recognized not Jeremy Corbyn, but, I don't know, Jeremy Vine or or Jeremy Clarkson maybe as our leader? Why wouldn't you? And Orlan says, the media are using the economy in Venezuela as the usual anti-socialist rubbish. Venezuela has an export economy, and like the other countries we don't like, we apply sanctions on them, then regime change. And Strange Brewer says, again, it's all about oil. What next? American troops marching into Caracas? Well, I almost wish that they would try it. Charlie Faye Culross says Venezuelan oil equals good oil, British oil equals good oil, Scottish oil equals bad oil. Explain, please. Charlie, you're so monomaniacal. You are so locked up in your parish pump. You can't even talk about this great issue of Venezuela without bringing it back to your wee, small-minded mentality. But thanks for listening and paying your 25 pence for texts. Hi, George. Here's our thoughts, says Jono. If there's going to be a hard border and there's going to be a European army, we could soon... That's a point I've just made, Jono. We could soon have German soldiers marching along our border. Perish the thought. See you tomorrow in Neath. Thanks, Jonah. And look, let's meet up, Jono, and just somehow work out how you and I came to the same thought simultaneously. I promise you, it's amazing. That's exactly what I have just said. German soldiers on the British border. What could possibly go wrong? Bob Justice says, so the Postal Vote Brigade have been misleading us. Yet again, the majority of media has been platforming these people disproportionately. As, for example, Umuna is a backbencher, but he's in the studios more than some of Labour's front bench. Who makes these decisions? For what purpose? I think we know the purpose, Bobby. But I have never taken more pleasure from anything in my life than the collapse of the so-called People's Vote Regiment. I have never seen the wind go out of people's sails quite so satisfyingly as I have watched that this week. And the Sky poll showing 58% of the people reject the idea of a second referendum just puts the tin hat on it. And Mathis says, well, the people should democratically control the oil fields and the economy as such. So yes, it is about democracy versus US Inc. And Marie McFarlane, my old pal in Scotland, says we need to do something about the UN. It doesn't seem to have any power or control. I have watched many hundreds of hours of trials, for example, against Israel, and the results are correct and meticulous. So what is to be done? I'm afraid the United Nations is a dead parrot. Scouse Alarm, my friend up in Liverpool, says America wants the oil of Venezuela, and that's why they are staging a coup. Well, that's very succinctly brilliant, and it's the whole case. X-Ray Vision says, brilliant interview regarding Venezuela. You're making a mockery of the fake MSM reporting. It is remarkable, I must say, militarized mendacity across all platforms. Marie says, as I've said 1,000 times, the real World War III is being fought right now between NATO and the UN. Has been since NATO emerged. It's coming up to the anniversary of NATO, 60 years. I think it's about time somebody launched a campaign for the disbandment of NATO, which was set up in order to confront an existential threat in the form of the Soviet Union and its allies that disappeared more than 30 years ago. The CIA are already all over Venezuela, says Bob, and have been for decades. Who advised the self-declared president to not stand in the last election? Screaming Lord Such always campaigned. Could it be the self-declared guardians of democracy don't actually believe in it? And Peter in Glasgow says the American invasion will come to us when Mr. Corbyn tries to send Trident back to the USA. And Daniel France says, I visited Venezuela in 2011, saw the Angel Falls, climbed Roraima. Caracas was very dodgy, though. I was warned not to converse with the police when they shouted Pasaporto at me for fear of them robbing me. I'm very glad that we're now joined by Alberto Testa, Associate Professor in Criminology, who studies the far right and the whole issue of populism and who's far right, who's far left. Are these lines being blurred? And he's a very fine academic indeed, and I'm glad he joins us. Alberto.
Hi.
Hi there. Thanks for coming on the show. I'll tell you what I principally wanted to talk to you about was the ontology, if you like, of these yellow vests, because some people who wish to discredit them imply that they're a lumpen far-right phenomenon. I don't believe that that's true. What's your expert opinion on that?
Okay, so let's say that I'm not a political expert, but obviously I study far right. I also studied the link between far right and terrorism, so I follow particular dangerous groups.
Yeah.
However, for what I know and for what I've seen online and monitoring, there is some truth about these. For what I have gathered is a melting pot of different type of ideology. But if we go and check flags and symbols, they have been flags and symbols which are connected with the far right. Just only, if it's possible, for your audience, just only to give an idea about what we are speaking when we're speaking about far right, because there is a lot of confusion. So far right is divided in two different groups. The first one is what I call it institutional groups. So we have it La Lega in Italy, we have Alternative for Germany, UKIP, that has become so far right that even Nigel Farage has quit. The other one groups, which are the most dangerous one, are called what I call it the siege mentality groups. These groups are similar to national actions. Actually, national action, yes, has been banned, but change name all the time is still in operation. What they do is they despise the democratic struggle. They want the objective destruction of the state as it is currently conceived. And actually, fair enough, they actually hate the first group, the institutional one, because they actually are seen as a soft, especially Tommy Robinson. Because they are paranoid and they are also anti-Semite, what they say is that they are shill paid by the Jewish group. So we have to deal, it's very fragmented, the far right, and I have seen symbols that actually are leading to this siege mentality group. So we have a mix of everything. Obviously, they have in common, these two groups, the same thing. They exploit the public concern for migration, exploit the European Union, they are averse against the European Union, they hate globalization, and where they radicalize in low-income areas, especially in UK. I just only mention statistics. In March 2018, the government let know that there is now an increase of far-right people that are referred to the authority. They are far-right extremists. Still, jihadi are the most prevalent, but it's increasing, and the far right is between 15 and 20 years old. Well, I mean, it's very interesting. The far right, the jihadist referral are coming from London and around the area. The far right referral instead is from the north, northeast, and the west Midland, which do not strike to be very affluent area of the UK. Just only another example. No one has repeated this, but the Jewish Times 5 days ago reported that the Norfolk, a village in Norfolk, people that were astonished because they have dropped neo-Nazi books into the library. And these books are not propaganda or alt-right and things. We are speaking about 20 fascist, anti-Semitic, and Nazi propaganda titles, including the Hitler Mein Kampf, The Origin of the Aryans by Isaac Taylor, and also the infamous anti-Semitic forgery of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. These, for a person that me study this group from the inside and monitor this group inside, tell me actually this group you find in the book list of who wants to join the siege mentality groups, which generally started the radicalization online.
Well, the British far right, I made a program about this called The Patriot Game, which you can see on YouTube. Historically, the British far right, whether explicitly or implicitly fascist, were rabidly anti-Semitic. And this continued after the war in Jordan's union movement and in Mosley's union movement and Jordan's English Defense League or whatever it was called. And this continued actually until the National Front finished in the 1980s. It's only comparatively recently that British fascist groups have fixed their attention on Muslims rather than Jews, on Asians rather than black people from the African Caribbean region.
They are very good. Again, let's distinguish the two groups. The institutional group play the democratic game, and in some way they are less dangerous because you can counteract them when they actually express their ideology. The problem instead that is the ongoing activism of these, what I call it, a siege mentality group. They are groups that are prepared to use violence. They justify violence as a legit means to overthrow the state and to create some kind of what they call it in their farnetication universal order. But they are very cunning. They are very skillful. Just only give you an example. I posted on my Facebook. If you go, you can check. I wanted to show how good and sophisticated is this propaganda. There is a book. A booklet for kids of 15, 20 years, and show in a dialogue format a dialogue between a young person that meet what they call it a freedom fighter, which he fight for the freedom of the oppressed indigenous population. And all is justified with a mix of chivalry code, symbols, all things that actually radicalize the youth. So this group are very dangerous, and they use a lot of kind kind of propaganda from the far left as well. They are anti-capitalism, they are anti-globalization, they are pro-working class. So when you speak, and they are very also cunning in how they call themselves. They don't call themselves Nazi, because a Nazi is not appealing. They call themselves a fascist, which is less threatening. The thing is
sounds
that
pretty threatening to me, Alberto.
No,
but
I
want to test you on this point, because whilst every fascist is a racist, every fascist is a homophobe, every fascist is believes in male supremacy, white supremacy, and so on. Not everyone who believes in those individual things is yet, at least, a fascist. A fascist is someone who wants the revolutionary overthrow of the state, the destruction of democracy, so that they can prosecute these ideas. That's an important delineation, isn't it?
Well, I mean, as an academic, I agree with you. But this group are neo-Nazi. They are not fascist. There is nothing fascist there, because they don't use Mussolini kind of speech. They don't use the ideology of Gentile. They actually, if you go and see their book list, which is longer than my student, is as 50 books, just only for people that they want to enter and be part only at the moment of the online group, and then after to meet. They are all Nazi. The old Nazi group. They do not use the word Nazi, and they call themselves fascist because fascist is the soft way. As an academic, though, you're obviously a politician, but as an academic, I sometimes disagree to the media. Fascist needed to be used only in the Italian context. Fascist is an ideology that originated in Italy and died in Italy. What you see, Franco was not a fascist. Hitler was not a fascist. Hitler was a neo-Nazi, completely different. Actually, if we want really to cut the hair in different parts, we can say that fascist is a movement that born from the far left, because Mussolini was a far left socialist from the Socialist Party, was also the director of the Avanti, which is the official party. So I take sometimes, with the journalists, sometimes they mix fascists, Nazis and things. Now, in reality there is no sense to call people fascist, because fascist is a fascio from the Roman mythology, is connected with Mussolini.
Yeah, but there's also a tendency, and I deal with this in my film, there's also a tendency to call anyone to the right of you fascist. I get people on Twitter calling Theresa May a fascist, or calling Nigel Farage a fascist. This is completely untrue, completely wrong.
No, but because the journalists, they like to simplify things, obviously because they needed to do the news. But this group, though, they call themselves fascist because they fear that if they use instead what they really are, because this group are neo-Nazis, but neo-Nazis now that they use a very appealing messages. They use a symbology, they use occult symbols, they use the writing of Julius Evola, they use the writing of Leon de Grenelle, and many other things. If you go and then read, as I said, I do this one for profession. I am one of the few academics that actually know them from the inside, so I know how they think, how they act. This is a neo-Nazi with a particular kind of things, and they use different things which are appealing to the working class, because they are against, for instance, migration. Why? Because they put the salary down to the indigenous people. No, they don't say that we don't like migration because we don't like have black people here or whatever thing it is. They just only make that excuse. They do not like Jewish. They use anti-Semitic rhetoric using the Templar myth, the myth of Christianity, and the fact that the Jewish, they have a problem with Christ. They say that they are linked with Christ. The same thing, but also, and I would like to say this one before that the interview finish, we need to tell politicians to be very, very careful about what they are saying.
Absolutely. Well, I think Her Majesty was making that point at the Women's Institute just yesterday. Alberto Testa, Professor in Criminology, University of West London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I've got Doogie on the screen. Shall I take him now? Doogie in Wolverhampton. Doogie, I hope you're coming to see me on Sunday in Birmingham.
No, I'm in Israel. I can't make it to Brum.
So you're in East Beirut, Israel, but not Brum. What a pity. I was really hoping to hear your voice. Anyway, go ahead, Doogie. Welcome back.
Now, the point I'd like to make is you've stated on the radio that Cuba's got no crime.
That's right, yeah.
Where'd you get your figures from for that statement?
Virtually no crime. Cuba has virtually no crime. Go ahead.
I repeat, where'd you get your facts and your figures for that statement?
From Cuba?
The Cuban government doesn't release crime figures.
Mm-hmm.
So where'd you get your figures from?
From the Cuban government. They may not release them to you, Dougie. They may not release them to you, Dougie, in Israel, but they sure release them to me.
George,
I'm rather closer to them than you are.
Cuba does not release crime figures. That is a fact.
Okay, Fidel Castro told me, and I believe him on the basis of my own eyes.
I've been to Cuba on holiday, George.
Yeah. And did you see any crime? Did you see any crime?
I only went to the beaches. I never went
Did you see any crime on the beaches? You'll see crime. Dougie, you'll see crime on the beaches in Miami. Did you see any crime on the beaches in Cuba? Honestly now, be honest.
No. You're trying to turn the table.
I think I did turn the table, Dougie. I didn't try. I think I did turn the table. I'm telling you, there is virtually no crime in Cuba because crime is heavily policed and rigorously punished. I thought you'd like that, Dougie.
Hang on, you've just said that it's heavily policed and heavily punished. You've just said there's no crime.
That's the reason there's no crime is because anybody who Dougie, anybody who commits a crime will be severely punished for it. I thought you'd like that, Dougie.
If the police heavily punish people that are committing crime,
no, the police don't punish. The courts do. It's heavily policed and rigorously punished. On the very rare occasion that it happens. I repeat for the fifth time, Dougie, I thought you'd like that.
You said the police heavily punish. You didn't say the courts.
Actually, I didn't. Dougie, you're simply wrong. So go on and make a better point. Go on and make a better point.
The point is the Cuban government does not release
It does to me.
On crime.
It does to me. It does to me. You can believe me or not. The listeners, for the most part, will believe me that there is virtually no crime in Cuba.
You didn't say virtually. You said there was no crime in Cuba.
I did say virtually. I did say virtually. Dougie, are you wasting the money of a phone call to Israel to semantically argue this rubbish? I really expected better from you than this.
No, because you keep spreading fake news.
No, but, is it fake news? Okay, let's deal with that, Dougie. Is it fake news? Is it fake news?
Yeah, it is fake news because
But you were in Cuba and you didn't see any crime.
Figures.
You were in Cuba and you didn't see any crime. Am I right?
I can go up my own town and not see a crime. That does not mean that crime doesn't happen.
Okay. Did you hear of any crime when you were in Cuba?
Yes.
Tell me.
You telling lies.
Tell me. Tell me what crime you heard of.
Everywhere.
Tell me what crime you heard of when you were in Cuba.
Robberies, people having their purses snatched, the wallet snatched, pickpocketers, this, that and the other.
So you didn't see any crime, but you did hear it. Who told you this?
I can go up my own town, George, and not see a crime, but it doesn't mean that it's
Have you got
happening.
a point to make, Dougie? Because you're really floundering here. You're really floundering here, mate.
Crime. You have said there's no crime in Cuba.
And that's it? That's what you called up? You called up from Israel for that?
And not seen any crime doesn't mean that crime does not happen.
You called all the way from Israel to endlessly make this point?
George, you keep spreading fake news. For you to go on the radio and say that there's no crime in
No, but
Cuba
you've
is
balanced it.
astonishing.
You've balanced it by telling us that you didn't see any crime. You were only on the beaches, but you did hear about
What was
crime.
my
So you've
report?
balanced it. That's what this radio
was my
show
report?
is all about,
hold
Doogie.
on.
This is what it's all about. What a pity that you're not able to come to the Old Rep tomorrow.
is
It
my
would have been
report,
simply
George?
wonderful to see the Oracle in person. Now, as France battens down the hatches for yet another weekend of yellow vest agitation, we speak with another sage, Adam. Adam Sage, the Times Paris correspondent. Adam, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Are you expecting tomorrow's events to be greater or larger than the previous weekend? Is it the case that actually, as we've moved into the new year, the numbers have begun to pick up again?
The numbers picked up again in January. They've been stable for the last 2 weeks, with the Interior Ministry counting 84,000 protesters around France. It's anyone's guess how many there'll be tomorrow. I suspect that there'll probably be bigger protests and more violence outside Paris as there were last week in Toulouse and Bordeaux, which seem to have become the centres of the protests.
Is it because the policing in Paris is particularly effective, he said euphemistically?
Well, I think there's a lot of police in Paris, and also the yellow vests, they tend to come from the provinces anyway. It costs a lot of money to get to Paris, I mean, week in and week out. So I think a lot of them reckon they've got a better chance of getting their voices heard in the provinces and are much closer to towns like Bordeaux and Toulouse than they are to Paris anyway.
Did you see any irony in President Macron as part of his great conversation, saying that Brexit has torn Britain apart when, in fact, it's France that is torn apart, although you could say it's pretty united against him because he's down at 17% in the opinion polls?
Yeah, well, that's fairly constant of all French presidents. What he was saying was the Yellow Vest's main demand, really, that the one thing they seem to agree on, there are most things they don't agree on, but the one thing they all seem to agree on is that they want what they call citizens' referenda. That is to say, you can have a referendum if you get 700,000 people signing a petition on any subject at all. And Macron was saying, hey, watch out for referendums. They don't always work out well. Look at Britain. It's not going so well in Britain. That was his point. Seems to me a fairly valid point, really.
No, well, yeah, although 700,000 Frenchmen can't be wrong, as the song might have said. Now, let's talk about the ontology of this Yellow Vest movement, because, as you say, a lot of them are from the provinces. A lot of them are not your usual suspects, Parisian left-wingers. From the left bank and so on. They are ordinary people, aren't they? There's been some effort made in some sections of the media to paint them as, I suppose, the French equivalent of the EDL, right-wing, street thugs and so on. Is that your impression?
No, I don't think so. No, I think it's very striking. It's a white working class movement. I mean, they're not the usual suspects in a sense because they're not the political extremists. There are political extremists who have infiltrated the movement, who are trying to manipulate the movement, that's for sure. But the essential body of it is not political extremists. I mean, the thugs that you meet on the streets of Paris during the riots, very often they're people who've never been demonstrating before. A lot of them have never come to Paris before, have just turned up to smash a few shop windows. They're not the usual suspects as well, because most riots in France in recent years have been race riots, and it's very, very striking that the suburbs around the big cities that have a lot of ethnic minorities are not joining this movement at all, and so it's a very unusual movement in French terms. I mean, it's white, working class, rural, small town, provincial movement.
That makes it more dangerous for Macron, doesn't it? Because it's much more difficult to categorise it than if it were the people in the banlieue, the communists in the CGT and so on. That would be easy to caricature. But if it's your ordinary French yeoman, their demands need to be taken seriously, don't they?
Well, he has taken their.
Oh, my goodness. We've lost Adam Sage, the Times Paris correspondent. Let's try and get him back. Mal says, I suggest that an EU super army would eventually be used to suppress any uprising within the EU of any peoples, should they choose to want to leave the club. And Jamie, I lost Jamie there. Tony says the overwhelmingly largest crime figures in Cuba relate to foreigners, US citizens and Colombians smuggling drugs through Cuba. And he adds, I've also got the data. Adam's back on the line. Sorry about that, Adam. I don't know what happened. You were saying that I think that he has taken their demands seriously.
He has indeed taken their demands seriously. I mean, he's 14 billion euros of tax cuts and welfare rises to try and meet their demand for a better level of more money, essentially. And he's also taken them seriously to the extent that he's putting great effort into the series of debates that are being held around France. I don't know what's going to come out of them, but he's spent an awful lot of time in recent days sitting down with mayors and with ordinary people discussing their concerns and their worries. So Macron is really taking them seriously, for sure, yeah.
But not seriously enough, because they're not going away.
The problem with the movement is that a traditional French movement, a traditional French movement, I mean, French or anywhere else, has a leader, someone you can call in for negotiation, someone who you can offer talks to, and someone who's going to go and say at the end of the day, hey guys, we've done really well, we haven't got everything we've got, but we've done enough, we can call it off, you can go back to work, it's finished now. The Yellow Vest movement has no leader, there's no one with whom he can talk, and there's no one who can say it's over. And anyone who tries to negotiate with Macron is immediately discredited by the rest of the movement and denounced as a traitor. It's very, very difficult to see in those circumstances how it can stop.
Well, quite. And the fact that it's incoherent with no leader and no programme as such allows people of all political stripes to join it. So its weakness is its strength and its strength is its weakness, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, anyone with a grievance is a yellow vest, really.
And that's spreading in Barcelona and Madrid this week. Taxi drivers complaining about Uber were wearing yellow vest. You just put a yellow vest on anything and you've become part of an international movement against the prevailing orthodoxy.
Yeah, and let's face it, who hasn't got a grievance against the government, against the establishment, against something? But as you said, it's also the movement's weakness. I mean, it's its strength in the defence to the extent that it can coagulate everyone in a sense, but it's a weakness as well because it has no coherence. And we've seen it this week with an attempt to form a yellow vest party, political party, to stand in the European elections. There were 10 figures who have emerged from the movement who put their names forward, but they've immediately been panned by the other yellow vests from right, left and centre. So it is a strength, but it's also a weakness, the incoherence as well.
Well, I'm grateful for your time, Adam. Are you preparing? Are you be out on the streets tomorrow, bringing Times readers what's happening?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I'll be out on the streets of Paris. As I said, I suspect that we'll see more action in the provinces. And one of the curious things about this movement is that Bordeaux, which is a very, very sedate city usually,
indeed,
a wine
spent
city,
a lot of time there,
has been one of the centres of the violence over the recent weeks, and may well be again tomorrow.
Adam Sage, the Times correspondent in Paris, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Grateful for your time. Let's take a few more messages before the break. X-Ray Vision says Doogie's gone dipping in Cuba to put the crime figures up. That was an extraordinary call, I must say. Jamie says, I've declared myself Governor-General of Puffin Island. Over sometime you bring the hobnobs, I'll put the kettle on, says Joe. Hassan says, would it not be more straightforward for the US to send troops from Montana into Alberta and capture their oil fields instead of going around the world to get oil? Well, there is a movement in Canada and in the United States for the two countries to enjoin, precisely for that reason, because there is a truly gigantic reservoir of oil in Canada. Truly, truly gigantic. Canada has supported President Trump. Canada, the United States, Albania and Kosovo. Now, Chris says, EU negotiations have been deliberately overcomplicated and made unnecessarily confusing by the Remain-biased establishment and media in their attempt to guarantee that we end up in exactly the current quagmire that we now face. And Tom Jarvis says, it's a shame Mrs. Merton isn't around to ask the Donald, what is it that first interested him so much about the country with the largest oil reserves on the planet? Brilliant, Tom. Excellent. Tony says, once again, I find the physicists' reliance on the standard nature of time in all their hypotheses to be wanting. 1 hour and 20 minutes has passed just as quickly as a blink. The mother of all talk shows reminds us every week how poorly treated we are by the rest of the mainstream media. Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate that. I feel that myself. That's why none of the other media ever talk about our existence. Scouser Lar says, I wonder why the second referendum brigade in the Labour Party don't go and join the Liberal Democrats. It's a party that is unanimous in wanting a second referendum and ignoring the will of the British people. It couldn't be that they're careerists, could it? Yes, Scouser Lar, it could very well be. You see, 80% more than of British voters last year in 2017 voted for parties committed to respecting the result of the referendum. The one party which stood on the opposite platform was the Liberal Democrats, and they lost more than 300 deposits and saw their parliamentary party decimated. That's why they won. Mountain Man says, how many respondents to the polls you have highlighted tonight? As you know, to be truly representative, a poll should have at least 2,000. And Bradley Northcote says, Justin Trudeau does not speak for all Canadians. Even his father, at least, had the subtle sensibility to recognize the CCP as the legitimate Chinese government, using trade and diplomacy rather than holding out for enforced regime change. That's a reference to the Liberal Justin Trudeau, who lined up with Albania, Kosovo, and Donald Trump. The second hour is by. The good news is there's an hour to go. CNN deliberately tipped off of the early morning arrest of one of President Trump's friends and able to film him coming out in handcuffs. So much for the professional integrity of the FBI. And then President Trump dramatically goes into the garden and announces that the US government is back in business, although not until February 15th. The man who knows is Michael Graham, my old colleague out there in the US of A. Hi, thanks very much, Michael, for joining us. Start with the dramatic arrest this morning and what it means, will you?
Well, first of all, I just want to point out that the idea that you would send in the SWAT, I don't know if how many people in the UK saw the video, but it was all over here because CNN had been tipped off, and so they're there. They had a SWAT team going in after. I know Roger Stone a little bit. I've interviewed him. I'm on the right, and so we have some similar circles. I'm not a fan, but I know him a little bit. You could have sent him
you could have sent
machine guns.
Yeah, you could have sent a special constable along. Yeah, a letter. Yeah,
Roger Stone is not going to flee. He's going to show up for court. It would be like sending in the special forces. Quite frankly, George, nothing personal, to get you. Yeah. I know many people want to see you arrested, and I can argue for good reason. But I mean, like you said, you could get some guard from the mall to come over and pick up George Galloway. You don't need to send in the Sylvester Stallone
with
crew
machine guns
to get Roger Stone. And something that needs to be highlighted about this, I have no problem believing that President Donald Trump has done bad things. He's the kind of guy I assume he's guilty because he's just that guy. But yet again, Roger Stone is another person who's being charged with crimes that have nothing to do with the original conversation, which was collusion between the Russian government and Trump to steal the election. This is all about what Roger did in response to the investigation. Now, he may He probably broke the law. He probably, maybe he lied to authorities. I don't know. But none of this has anything to do with he's under arrest because of collusion or his involvement with collusion. That's just not there.
Quite so. And that's becoming a bit of a habit, isn't it, Michael? Because I looked at the indictment before the show, the charges before the show. And it's a 25-page document. And the word Russia doesn't appear in the 25 pages. So why is Mueller, whose remit is collusion with Russia, ordering the arrest of people like Stone?
Why was Kenneth Starr, who started off investigating a shady property deal in Arkansas, suddenly interrogating Monica Lewinsky about her knee pad wearing habits? This is what happens when you have these unleashed prosecutors. And one of the things that America inherited from Great Britain, and one of the many great things that we inherited from you, is this tradition under common law that the police powers of the state should belong to the people through their elected officials. In other words, in the end, everybody in theory works for Congress, or in your case, the parliament, or if you get to the state level, the state legislature. Nobody, not even the FBI, not even the top cop, works on their own. And that's because there needs to be accountability. And every time we set up an investigator with no accountability, we have these embarrassing fiascos.
Do you think they may have overreached themselves? They may have overplayed their hand with this one?
So I've been, it's interesting. I'm of my many jobs, I'm the politics editor for Inside Sources that covers Washington, D.C. And we have another product called New Hampshire Journal, which is focused on the first in the nation primary. We just gotten out of the field with some polling, and some of it hasn't been released yet, so I can't really talk about all of it. But the Russia story never comes up. When you ask Democrats why they hate Trump, it never comes up. When you ask Republicans why they love him or why they're worried, it is as though there's the media in America may as well be broadcasting every night in, Uzbek or Swahili or, Portuguese, because this just has no one buys. The people who think Trump is crooked think he did things far worse than the allegation of collusion. They think, and I'm not making this up, George, that he's an actual Russian agent. So they're off on their loony land. And then on the other hand, the people who love Trump either have just blown off the story, or they think, hey, if Russia helped keep Hillary out of the White House, good for them. Das Viet Revolutia. That's the new slogan. So there you go.
Well, look, I know you can't release everything, but can you give us any taste of how these polls are going in New Hampshire?
Well, and it's not just New Hampshire. They reflect the polling we've seen nationwide, which is that the government shutdown has really hurt President Trump. And his numbers, he was consistently polling in the 40s, kind of hanging around between 42, 44%. He's now solidly in the 30s, in both nationwide. And the reason I mention New Hampshire is because it's the first state with a primary, and it's a state that a lot of people have used in the past to end presidencies by mounting primary challenges. LBJ was forced to not run again after he did poorly there. George H.W. Bush, the end of his presidency started when Pat Buchanan, an unknown media personality, ran against him and got 40% of the vote. So, it's a state that everybody takes the temperature of, and Trump is now down in the 30s there. He's never been in the 30s there. He almost won the state. And so he had to reach an agreement today, as Trump is calling it. I'm not saying, George, that Trump surrendered, okay? I'm not saying he surrendered, but I will say the speech sounded much better in the original French. I will go that far.
It does. I mean, because I've been on the air, I haven't been able to study the terms of it. But is it being presented in the American media as a climb down by Trump?
And not only is it being presented, there's no other way to look at it. So what Trump said is we're going to reopen the government, and then we're going to spend the next 3 weeks having good faith talks. And I have no doubt my Democratic friends will work with me in a cooperative spirit of open cooperation. So obviously he was lying his pantaloons off. And then 17 minutes later, Speaker Pelosi walks out from the cameras and says, oh, sure, we'll be glad to talk, but, there's no wall. So it's done. She's straight up. The thing that he's supposed to negotiate over, she has said straight up,
he has laboured mightily over
this. He lost.
He's laboured mightily over this and brought forth not even a mouse, not even a brick for his wall.
No, nothing. He has nothing to show for it. And so this is the question. Trump is in a different spot than most. For example, Theresa May. Someone was asking me, because I follow British politics more than the average American. Why does Theresa May still have a job? And I said she is benefiting from the magnificent power of zero expectations. Nobody likes her. Nobody plans to like her. Nobody expects to like her. So when they wake up and they don't like her, they don't have a problem with that, because she's just kind of there, stuck in this mess in a party that can't decide what it wants. Trump isn't that way. Trump's power is that 60% of America doesn't like him, 40% of America loves him, and that 40% is more energized, and so they can theoretically, deliver.
Although if you're right, Michael, that 40 is beginning to dip dangerously near 30.
That's the question. The question isn't what was the damage that was being done by the government shutdown. And politically, it was hurting him. And for people who don't know, LaGuardia Airport in New York actually stopped handling flights today because there weren't enough flight workers, employees, safety officials, et cetera. Now, if you've ever flown through LaGuardia, there's not much difference between when it is up and running and when it's not. But still, it looks bad in the press, and so that was hurting him. But that's not Trump's problem. Trump's problem is, did his back down, did his surrender, did his cave today cost him with the base? Ann Coulter, who is a pretty good reflector of the mood of that kind of core 18% of the population that really backs Trump, said today, "Congratulations, George H.W. Bush, you are no longer the weakest person to serve as president of the United States."
Read my lips. Read my lips. Now, I know you're a man of the right, as you say,
yes,
but you are keeping your eye on the left. What's happening with the Democrats? More and more people now seem to be throwing their bonnets into the ring, and quite a few of them are women.
There are more women running for president as announced candidates right now than there are men. There are going to be at least 4 women candidates. Senator Elizabeth Warren from where I am in Massachusetts, Senator Kamala Harris from California, who's been called since 2009, since before she was in the Senate, quote, the female Barack Obama. One of her parents is from India. One of her parents is from Jamaica. And so that's the kind of her narrative strength. Then you have Senator Gillibrand of New York, who chased what's his name, the comedian Al Franken out of the Senate. She's the one who really played up the sexual harassment charges. And so her whole thing is, hashtag women. And then you have Tulsi Gabbard. Have you interviewed Congresswoman Gabbard from Hawaii?
Not yet, but I'm very interested in her.
Well, she's because she's like yourself. She has an eclectic view of the world. And of course, by eclectic, Americans use that word to mean crazy. And so you definitely need to talk to her. I think it'll be a fascinating conversation.
I will. At this point, do you think Bernie Sanders will throw his hat in the ring?
So I spoke to a big-time Bernie campaign guy here who was in New Hampshire, which is once again right next door to Vermont, and where Bernie really launched his campaign. And he said the frustration that he and his friends feel is that they know people in the old campaign. These are the old guard, and they don't know if Bernie's going to run. And the question is, perhaps he hasn't decided yet, but he goes one day, he'll make a powerful speech, and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy's running. And then the next day you think, I don't know. One of the challenges is he has inspired a new generation. Well, some of those new generation are now running.
Are now running, yes.
Yeah, so it may be the case of thanks for getting us started, Gramps, now have a seat and we're out of here, So I don't know.
Michael, it's always fascinating talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Michael Graham, the veteran United States correspondent and analyst. I appreciate your time. Bradley Northcutt says, no, I've done that one. That was on Justin Trudeau. David Leviscont says the FBI are still working for the Clintons. Never before have I seen such an attack on a president. The USA is so corrupt. Red Resistance says, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall during what I heard described today as the World Wreckers family reunion in Davos. The talk over the lobster must be about how to bury the loot under the patio, as these rich fools surely know their time is up. Well, Adam is coming back into the studio. Ask Adam anything at all, because I promise you he knows absolutely everything. It's been a great show tonight. I hope you'll agree. And one of the men who made it so is Adam Gary. Ask Adam is the hashtag. Any question at all that you want to ask. Let me ask you one that came up there during the break. You have a pretty left field idea as to who might be one to watch in the forthcoming U.S. presidential race. Tell us about him.
Well, he's called Andrew Yang, a successful businessman in the tech industry who then went into education and philanthropy aimed at giving people real-life skills for the modern business world. He is someone who's addressed the elephant in the room, which is the fact that automation and artificial intelligence, they call it AI, is going to take the jobs not only of what's left of the manufacturing sector, but also lorry drivers, truckers, which in 29 of the 50 U.S. states is the number one profession. So in order to prepare for this transition to a different kind of workforce, which will require a different economic model, he's proposing what he calls a freedom dividend, giving every U.S. citizen, non-means tested, just no questions asked, between 18 and pension age, $1,000 in their bank account in order to kickstart the economy and guarantee a baseline income for people, which then they can go over and beyond. I think it's great. It will encourage entrepreneurialism.
How's he going to fund that?
He's going to fund it by installing a VAT in the U.S. Because while the U.S. has very uneven sales taxes on products in various states, there's no VAT. And a VAT tax is like a sales tax, only it covers services rather than simply the sale of goods. He wants to instigate that at a 10% rate. The average European rate is 20%. And with that, he's done all the calculations. They're all there on his website. He claims he can pay for it. I think he's certainly the one with the freshest ideas in the race.
Now, this is called a freedom dividend for a reason.
Well, initially, he wanted to use the more academic term universal basic income. And one of the things I like about Andrew Yang is he's very candid. He said when they shopped this idea to people, the left and the center loved the idea. The Trump guys on the right said we hate it. But when you change the term universal basic income to the freedom dividend, the Trump guys loved it too. So he said, okay, it's the freedom dividend. That's the kind of pragmatism America needs.
Freedom fries. Now, Norma, who's one of our legends in Bristol, has a question for you. Norma, welcome. Ask Adam.
Hello.
Hi.
Adam, I'm not one of these intellectuals, but
nor am I.
Well, you are really. I wanted to ask you, what's your solution to this problem in Venezuela? Now, I've made a few little notes, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
And leaving aside this Guido chap being recognised as takeover president by the countries you mentioned, today I saw a programme I'd recorded about the life of Chavez, a documentary on
Was
the
this
TV.
the BBC one, Norma?
I think so, but
Yes.
you know, I think it was on BBC too, but I had recorded it.
Yeah, I wouldn't have watched it myself. I'm glad you did.
Oh.
You did, so I didn't have to.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what. I mean, I sort of enjoyed it in as much as it did tell us about the life of Hugo Chavez. He had a heart of gold, and he eventually, power corrupted him a bit, and he died and things got out of control. Now then, Mr. Maduro took over, and he didn't have the charisma that Chavez had. And
There's not two Chavez, Norma.
No, there's not, no. And the country's now in a very bad way. And I wanted to ask Adam Gary, what is your solution to the problem? Because
Well, first of all, Norma, we've got, before I pass it on to Adam, we have to ascertain whether the story you're being told on the BBC about Venezuela is any truer than the story you're being told about everything else on the BBC. I really caution you not to imagine that the BBC tells the truth about Venezuela whilst telling lies about almost everything else. Adam.
The solution is one that probably won't be listened to because it's win-win, and a lot of people in Washington prefer this zero-sum game. But here's the solution. The US and China are involved in trade talks. Venezuela owes China a lot of money. China is a Venezuelan partner. Ergo, here should be the solution. the Chinese and the Americans should talk in private. And if the Chinese can convince the Americans to essentially hold their dogs back, the Chinese will agree to take shipments of Venezuelan oil for free, thereby removing extra oil from the market, keeping the price up, which is what certainly the American oil industry and incidentally Russia would want. And in so doing, the Venezuelan economy could temporarily become a protectorate of China, and there could be various gives and takes where China essentially pretends, or in some ways puts a leash on Maduro, but in order to save his presidency, he'll have to pay China in oil for this insurance policy, and in return, the Americans can get a favorable deal from China, which they were going to give anyway. But don't tell Trump that. That's the only solution. Admittedly, it's a novel one, and I don't think it's going to happen.
Norma, last word to you.
Well, yes, okay, but there's hardly any medicines. There's lots and lots of poverty. People haven't got enough food. That's the sort of address that I wanted to actually hear.
But it's not
it's
true.
Worrying.
But it isn't true. The people in Venezuela have free health, free education, from the kindergarten to the university. There's a massive house building program of millions of houses. I'm not sure if they told you any of that on the BBC.
Of Hugo Chavez, the history of his life, and all the people were commenting various places.
Yeah, but it's the BBC, Norma. I'm concerned that you have fallen hook, line and sinker for what I have heard was a pure propaganda program. People are poor in Latin America. They're less poor in Venezuela than they are in the rest of Latin America. You could make that documentary about any Latin American country. The difference is, in Venezuela, you can go to the doctor for free, your kids go to school for free, you're getting a brand new council house, and so on.
Well, it was totally different to what I saw today. And I just wonder how I can educate myself sometimes.
Well, my first advice to you is not to believe what you hear on the BBC. Thanks, Norma, for that. Marie says, like whiskey, Scotland's oil is not owned by Scotland. The Scottish government welcomed a Ukrainian fascist to Holyrood in June 2018, the same week that Theresa May did. Scotland is on the side of Ukraine, re Venezuelan oil. And Tony X, here's a tricky one for you. Ask Adam, why do you believe the PKK are active in the northwest of Syria? And what evidence do you have?
Well, the United States admits that they're there. They just call them by a different name and pretend it's a different group. It was Gore Vidal who said that marketing was the only original art form America invented. Senator Lindsey Graham, who is someone very opposite than me in terms of my general geopolitical outlook, he at long last admitted that this YPG and PKK were the same group. Even John Bolton, who after visiting his good friend Mr. Netanyahu changed his tune, he's on video from about 3 years ago on Fox News saying that they're the same group. So it's not a matter of listening to Turkey, even though, of course, Turkey should be listened to. It's a matter of listening to the Americans themselves and realizing that their two-card Monty has been exposed by the sands of time.
Okay. Hassan says, okay, Adam, who'll win the UEFA Champions League in May?
Who are the contenders?
It's too early to say, Hassan. Even Adam doesn't know that. Tyler Durden says, why is Adam Gary viciously against Tulsi Gabbard?
Because she's on the side of one of the most extremist elected governments in the world today. They're a government that's overseen a cow vigilante epidemic. Now, what that means is men, women, and children are tortured, kidnapped, raped, and brutalized if they're accused of eating or trading in beef. They're a government that's trying to erase, culturally cleanse the hundreds of years long of Muslim history in South Asia. And she not only whitewashes them, but she glories in them. She stands next to them and then has the nerve to go before the US Congress and say that the occupiers of Kashmir are in the right and the victims of the occupation are in the wrong. substitute the Muslims in India for the Palestinians in Palestine, and one gets a fairly good idea of why I'm completely opposed to her.
X-Ray Vision says, I think fascism has evolved. Today we have corporate fascism, adopted by many, even so-called liberals behave like fascists. Nazism today is just what it always was, racism. And Glenn Jenkins says, Jezza's customs union with clarification or exemption from state aid, competition and posted workers' directives would defang the neoliberal empire and incite other EU citizens to demand the same. Do you agree, George? Not really. I'm against being in a customs union as opposed to having no customs barriers with the 27 that we leave behind for the moment in the EU, because a customs union with these clarifications and exemptions, Glenn, wouldn't be the customs union that the EU has, and we're not in a position to make them make these exemptions or clarifications. As I always say, in the words of the late and great Bob Crow, if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. Charlie is in Glasgow. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Charlie.
Hiya, George.
Hi.
Hiya. I would like to ask Adam. I'm an environmentalist, and I would like to ask Adam about, the threat about sort of runaway climate change. It seems to be getting closer and closer, and the changes that are required to avoid this are so, radical and challenging. How does he see this developing in the sort of near future in the next 5-10 years?
Good question, Charlie. Good call. Adam?
So you asking about how I see the next 5 to 10 years in Venezuela?
No, in customs, in climate change.
Oh, in climate change.
He's saying that climate change is such a runaway train at the moment that we're going to have to make very radical changes to our lives and development and so on. Otherwise, we may reach this tipping point that people talk about in 12 years.
Well, I think that 12 years theory, it's comes from a US politician that I don't have a lot of time for. But on the climate change thing, there's two things. One, I think one of the reasons this debate has become so toxic is that the people who don't believe in human-made climate change won't hear the other side, and the people who believe in climate change caused by mankind as some sort of religion won't hear their opponents. So I think that that's made a debate which ought to be one that's scientific-based and objective, clouded. And I'm agnostic on that. I'm willing to hear true scientists from both sides. The second thing, though, which I am somewhat in control of as someone who commentates on policy, is that when the next industrial revolution happens, it will happen in Africa, and it will be powered by China, in particular Chinese solar power. The Chinese now make the most efficient, effective, including cost-effective solar panel technology in the world. And China knows this very well in terms of the importance, because after China had its great industrial revolution of the modern era in the 80s, pollution increased. Therefore, they had an incentive to make it economically viable to decrease it. They're doing it in China, and much more interestingly, perhaps, they're doing it in Africa. So look to China if one wants to lower emissions, because whatever one's views are on climate change, the lower the emissions, the better the planet.
Charlie, last word to you.
Hiya, George. Well, just a couple of things. The ISO 12-year thing, it didn't come from a US politician. It came from a UN intergovernmental panel on climate change, which was published just 2-3 months ago, And that's actually quite conservative, because it actually required the agreement of 200-300 scientists. And basically, essentially, the problem is how do we... The fossil fuels that are in the ground, they basically all have to stay in the ground, because we don't have any technology which can suck the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. I mean, that's the problem, or one of the problems.
Yeah, one of many. Charlie, I need to press on because there's so many people trying to get through. Let's hear from Reese. Go ahead, Reese.
Hi, George. I just wanted to talk about Venezuela. You had a caller on who was asking how they could educate themselves. There's two excellent documentaries, The War on Democracy by John Pilger and South of the Border, and they cover the Latin Americas and particularly Hugo Chavez in The War on Democracy. And once somebody starts seeing that, it really opens their eyes as to what the BBC done and what CNN done when he's done the coup d'etat on Chavez, and they flew him out to the helicopter, and the press release out all things you already know, and then
exactly,
they have to retract it the following days.
I'm not joking, Rhys. If the BBC told me it was Friday, I'd need to check. I would not believe a political word that comes out of their mouths.
Yeah, and that documentary really changes your perspective on everything that comes out of there. They even changed the camera angles to show the people who were defending themselves as if they were attacking the government, which was a load of rubbish. Well, they were defending themselves against the
Rhys,
militia.
They've been publishing pictures of gigantic pro-Maduro demonstrations as if they were anti-Maduro demonstrations. There's no end. Look, as I put it in my column on RT.com this week, before they drop the bombs, they drop the narrative. They drop the propaganda narrative. And this has been the longest bombing run in history. Rhys, I hope you're coming to Neath tomorrow night. I hope to see as many of my friends at the Gwyn Hall in Neath tomorrow night. Thanks for the call, Rhys. X-Ray Vision says, Doogie of East Beirut via Israel saw no crime in Cuba, but swears it's rife with criminality. This guy is priceless. Not sure if he's priceless. Filza says, why is my Fitbit showing a drastic increase in my heartbeat? Well, do I have that effect on you, Filza? Oh no, it's Doogie from Israel. I'm enjoying your conversation. You are Superman. Thank you very much for that, my dear Filza. Now, Chris says, the whole EU withdrawal. No, we've done that one. Fra in Ireland says, if Adam Sage is correct in his assertion that the Yellow Vest movement is mainly a white working class movement demanding change, Macron's real concern is they are registered voters who may be ready to end his tenure. Look at it another way, Fra. What will happen when the black people and the immigrant people come onto the field? Tommy says, maybe a little off topic, but I've noticed we're being inundated with adverts both on TV and radio for not-for-profit health insurance, funeral plans and army recruitment. Is there something coming under the Brexit radar that I'm not aware of yet? Hope not, Tommy. In Oxfordshire, Mal says Mueller's remit was also to investigate and pass on any other crimes that he found as part of the Russian collusion investigation. I don't think that's actually true, Mal. And V. Kopenga says Norma should watch Abby Martin and her documentary on Venezuela on the YouTube channel, The Empire Files. It is truly wonderful. Thank you for that, my friend. And dear Norma, please do have a look at that. Now, Shen is in Manchester. He's on the line. He's up next. Go ahead, Shen.
Hello, George. Great show as usual tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I'm looking forward to the two shows on Saturday and Sunday.
Are you coming to them both?
I'll be there at both. It's going to be a hell of a 2 nights.
It's going to be a great weekend, actually, yeah. And there's plenty to talk about. So it's the Gwyn Hall in Neath tomorrow night and the Old Rep in Birmingham on Sunday night. I saw a lovely picture, excuse me, of the Old Rep tonight. It is a really exquisite space. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and the people there are ever so nice. The people in Neath are absolutely lovely, and I've seen some of the tweets as well from people.
Actually, Neath, considering its size in comparison to Birmingham, have performed magnificently. So there's over 300 tickets for both venues already sold, and I think we'll get quite a lot of walk-ups. Anyway, Shen, what's your point, caller?
No, I just wanted to say that I thought it was going to be. I thought before Dougie's call was a bit strange, but I would love to have seen him there, and that was my point because I wanted him to ask you a question.
You and me, we both wanted to see Dougie there. He would have set the place alight, maybe literally. Thank you, Shen, for that. Here is a legend from the past. It's Rainbow George in London. George, how wonderful to hear from you again.
Oh, it's nice to speak to you, George. It's been a long time.
Long time, a decade or more.
Yeah, I was listening earlier and I tuned in. You're not in favour of a people's vote.
No, that's dead. That's a dead parrot now, George.
I don't think so. I'm I call myself an apprentice prophet, but I do suppose that I've been shown the future, and I'm sure there is going to be a people's vote. And
how's that going to come about?
And 16-year-olds will take part in that, as they should have done in the first referendum.
How's that going to come about, George?
Just because no other solution is going to get enough support.
Yeah, but the government has to legislate for a second referendum, and the government has been very clear that it won't, and it can't because it will split the Tory party in two.
I maintain my prediction. There will be another referendum.
And is this something you've seen in a crystal ball, or have you got any basis for arguing it?
I can't see a case against it, just because of the 16-year-old factor. As I say, they should have been voting in the first referendum.
No, if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. They weren't voting, and the first referendum's been held, and it hasn't been implemented. That's the reason why we can't have one.
But we will, and I'd like to put something else in front of you. I'm anticipating a Brexit to a Brexit, and Brexit stands for Britain and Ireland joining together and leading the way to a new European Union.
You think after centuries of British occupation, Ireland will rejoin Britain?
No, we'll join together and become the wise islands. Wise as in Wales, Ireland, Scotland, England spells out wise, and we will lead the way to, as I say, a new European Union that has no countries in it, and will change the world. I'm sure of that.
Okay, George, thanks for that controversial view. Let's go to another legend, Damien in Brighton. Go ahead, Damien.
Good evening, George.
Evening.
George, could we discuss the options that are available to Parliament to fulfil its democratic obligation to leave the EU?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So apparently there are three options. You've already pointed out this evening, George, that the second referendum campaign ended up being a bit of a damp squib. Couldn't get support in both the Commons and the country, and obviously it's fallen.
And Labour has swung decisively against it. Ian Lavery's speech tonight said it would do serious damage to democracy in Britain. The pendulum has swung. 10 members of Jeremy Corbyn's front bench would have resigned off the front bench if Labour had backed a second referendum. I think Jeremy Corbyn has played this whole thing magnificently.
I agree, George. I believe the latest, there's a large body of convincing evidence that attempting to frustrate Brexit would damage Labour's electability. And in fact, there was a survey commissioned by a pro-Brexit group that showed Labour would lose 3 million votes if it frustrated Brexit. They buried that report. Fortunately, it was leaked, George. So, George, as I see it, there are three options: May's deal, no deal, or a Labour deal. I think it is worth noting that considering there are only three options on the table, the media are only covering two of those options and are completely ignoring the Labour option, which I think, considering it's such a big decision, that people should have information about the options available. But that aside, George, so May's deal has suffered a thumping and historic defeat in the Commons already. Unless there's substantive changes to that, it's going to fail to pass. And as she's prevented from making substantive changes by the hard right of her party, then that's ruled out. That's not a credible deal either. Which brings us on to the no deal, George. Now, I've got very grave concerns about that because of the state of the economy. We've got almost half of the workforce earn 20k or less and have little or no disposable income. We have got the same level of growth as we had in 2010, and the Tories have doubled the national debt to over 2 trillion. I think there's a risk that their no deal could trigger a recession, potentially a deep and a long one. So that's my concerns about no deal, George. So finally, it brings us on to the Labour deal. So Labour's deal is to have a customs union for frictionless and tariff-free trade, match protections, human rights, consumer, environment, and workers' rights. what that does, the genius of that, is that it protects the integrity of both the single market and the UK, thus solving the Northern Ireland question.
But how do you get a Labour deal when Labour doesn't have a majority?
I think I agree with John Healey on this, George. I think a majority can be formed in Parliament, a consensus around the customs union. Because, as I say, this no-deal option is, with the state of the economy, is something that we want to avoid if at all possible.
Okay, Damien, time is our enemy. Thank you very much. Eileen is in Exmouth. Let me hear from her. Eileen?
I'm actually in Sydenham at the moment, George. Hi.
All right. Nice to hear from you, Eileen.
Nice to talk to you again. I hope Damien's right, and I love George's idea of the Wise Islands, but can you please fill me in? I think I've got out of the loop. I don't know what's happened with the Chukwuemeka, Hillary Benn, Yvette Cooper People's Vote thing. I didn't realise it was off the table.
It's collapsed, yeah. They had an amendment that they were boasting for weeks would pass in the House of Commons. They've now withdrawn it because...
Oh, they've withdrawn it?
Yeah, it's withdrawn because it wouldn't pass.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, so I thought they had a great following.
Well, so they told us, but the Sky poll this evening rather puts the kibosh on that. 58% don't want a second referendum.
So are you telling me that it's withdrawn and there's absolutely no way a people's vote is going to be put forward now?
The amendment has been withdrawn, and they held a sort of press conference at the door of Parliament. Chuka was done up like Rupert the Bear. He didn't say a word. Because he couldn't articulate. He would have sobbed if he'd opened his mouth.
Can I get this on YouTube?
Yes.
Oh, great. Fantastic. I'm going on there now.
All right, Eileen, thank you very much indeed for that lovely call. Lord Brancy says, God bless Norma. I have friends who have beautiful hearts, but watch too much of the mainstream. They get fed lies for life. It's difficult to adjust when someone like the great Gigi points the truth out. Thank you, my lord. Hedy says, hi, George. At the moment, it's Gunners 1, Gunners Red Devils 3. I understand Solskjaer means sunshine. I can believe it. Well, I've got one eye on the television screen in the top right-hand corner of my studio, and I am a very, very happy man. Chris says nearly 90% of Venezuelans live in poverty. That can't just be for the benefit of sanctions. Socialism is probably done with good intentions, but for the most part it rewards failure and encourages failure. Giving away free or very cheap products has an effect on business. The US doesn't like socialism as it's bad for US business interests in these countries. But Venezuela would fail without US interference. That's from Chris in Colchester. The Lord Brancy, I agree with the last tweeter. The Abby Martin documentaries from Telesur give the real view of what's happening in Venezuela. Essential viewing. That's Abby, A-B-B-Y, Martin, M-A-R-T-I-N. She is the oracle on Venezuela. The Communicipalist, another of our great, great correspondents, says, I will never accept the result of another referendum if the result of the last one has been sabotaged. I shall join with millions to subvert and frustrate any attempt to deny democracy with a sham second vote. Yeah, you and me both, but it's not going to happen. Tony says, Damien didn't just come back, he landed with a thump. And Georgie, a nobody who wants a general election. Georgie, you're far from a nobody. Great programme tonight, Gigi. I've learned so much. Wishing you a great Burns night too. Have you caught your haggis yet? And will you be piping it onto the moats? I won't, actually. I'm not big in the Burns scene. I'm a Tommy Burns supper man. Some people will know what that means. But I do love this from Robert Burns. Ye hypocrites, are these your pranks? To murder men and gie God thanks. Halt! Desist! Go nae further. God'll no accept your thanks for murder. And David says, are you suggesting the BBC tell us lies? What? Unbelievable. Now, the surreal brilliance of Ian Lee is up next.
I feel bad stepping on the toes of your show. I know it's a new dictate from the boss that we have to come in and do a little handover at the end of the show.
It's a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Don't take this the wrong way. The end of your show is always my favourite part of the shows. Not because it's the end, but because you sum it up and you're passionate and it all, I
did a peroration the other day, which I was quite proud of, but which they haven't clipped and put out. I don't know why. It's maybe just an error.
It's always those moments when you come out thinking, well, that was a really good bit, and no one notices it.
Exactly.
And goes,
Exactly.
Listen, me and Kath have been outside watching videos of Queen and David Bowie because I watched that terrible Freddie Mercury film the other day.
I heard it was very bad.
It's been nominated for Best
It's
Movie
going to win the
Oscars.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I don't think it can win because the director is involved.
The director's now in trouble,
yes. But so I was listening to bits of your show as we came in. So hang on, George Bush, that's how old I am. Trump has backed down.
Oh, he's reopened. He's reopened the U.S. government, and he didn't get his wall. Not a brick.
And
not a single brick.
Has he come out and said, "I'm really sorry for screwing the country around for the last 2 months"? And
I think he's sorry for the loss in his own opinion poll ratings.
Is he on the way down?
He's on the way down. He was always around 40.
Yeah.
With which he could win another term.
Yeah.
But now he's down 33. So a third of the people really love him.
But what has changed? Because his fan base, I thought, you know this more than me, but his fan base, he survived. He got voted in after he took the mickey out of a report. I remember the point for me when I knew he would be president was when he had the reporter who had physical disability.
Yeah.
And he
mocked him.
He mocked him. And I thought, if they go for that, this guy can do anything and he'll be in.
Yeah.
The fan base are turning.
At the margins, and the margins are critical. The reason is hundreds of thousands of American workers have now missed a second paycheck.
Right, yeah, of course.
Because he's holding the country to ransom for a wall that most people are not persuaded will ever be built.
So people are finally feeling it in their bellies and in their pockets.
Right.
And
I think that's right.
Mind
you, he could come back. A foreign war never does you any harm. Ian Lee and Flippin' Kath up next. And I promise you, you'll be glad I told you to stay tuned because it's one of the best shows on British radio and it's coming up right now. It's been marvellous for me, and if it was for you, come back again next week. Same time, same place, and bring another listener with you. Why don't you?